Good morning and welcome to the American Public Works Association's Talking Top Tech webinar series. Today's panel discussion will be 1 hour in duration and is titled Talking Top Tech Cybersecurity Edition. Due to the free form format of this program, it is not eligible for CEUs. My name is Rita Cassada and I will be your facilitator today. I am an education manager at APWA. I have a BS in Mechanical Engineering from Kansas State University and an MS in Engineering Management from the University of Kansas. I'm a licensed professional engineer in Kansas, and before joining APWA, I served as the Public Works Director for the City of Lewisburg, Kansas. A recording of today's program will be available in the APWA Members Library and on YouTube within 1 week. APWA members can log into the library to access content free of charge. Not an APWA member? Take the members library for a test drive. Spend 2 weeks accessing all the materials in our members library for free. Look for the link to sign up in your email today after the program. Today's session is interactive. So if you have questions for our speakers, please type them into the chat pod. You may do this at any time throughout the program. When you are in full screen mode, you can access the chat pod by hovering the mouse at the top of the screen and clicking on the chat icon. Now it's time to introduce today's panelists. Tara Brewer is an IT analyst for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Tedrick Hausch III is a partner at Lathrop Gage LLP. Dave Mims is the CEO for Sophisity. And Marty Williams is the Government Affairs Manager for APWA. Unfortunately, due to an emergency, Mo Islami, the state ITS and Signals Management Engineer for the North Carolina Department of Transportation, is unable to join our panel today. APWA is delighted to bring you such knowledge and experience. We are going to start the program with each of the panelists giving a brief overview on how they are involved with cybersecurity. Tara, would you like to go first? Tara, would you like to give your experience with cybersecurity?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'm Tara Brewer with Department of Homeland Security supporting CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, which was officially signed into law November 2018 by President Trump. Our mission space consists of public outreach and coordination of cybersecurity resources and incident response.
Thank you, Tara. Tedrick, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Rita. My name is Tedrick Hausch, and I'm an attorney at Lathrop Gage. I lead our cybersecurity and data privacy group, also work with blockchain and some disruptive technologies. We help businesses with all of the preventative and reactive issues that you have to deal with respect to data.
Thank you, Tedrick. Dave, would you like to go next?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dave Mims, CEO of Sophisity, and we deliver the IT in a Box program for cities across Georgia, Kentucky, Arkansas, Alabama, and we focus in on cybersecurity, data backup, disaster recovery, training, and in serving our cities. Thank you.
And finally, Marty, would you like to give your overview?
Good morning. My name is Marty Williams. I handle emergency management, homeland security, and cybersecurity issues with intent how they relate to public works for APWA on behalf of the 30,000 plus members. And it's one of those really exciting fields where I haven't yet met Tara, but I've met a lot of folks at CISA and DHS and look forward to hearing her thoughts. And I think it's a great opportunity for us as public works to sort of get in on the ground floor, so to speak, in working with cybersecurity and how that plays an important role in what we do.
Thank you, Marty. Now we're going to get started with our questions. We have a few questions that were submitted in advance, but just remember to submit your questions in the chat pod at any time, and we will get them asked to our panelists. The first question is for Dave. What are our 3 greatest cybersecurity risks?
Every organization's 3 greatest risks are what we call the 3 Ps. I strongly recommend that you take these back to your organization and ask who's responsible for IT, but how you're addressing them. But the 3 Ps are passwords, patching, and people. Every incident that occurs is going to have one or more of those as a part of the cause for it. And when you begin to address passwords, password policies and implementation, patch management, and then keeping your people trained, you remove yourself from being low-hanging fruit for the bad guys. So talk with who's managing your technology and ask them, what are you doing around passwords, patching, and people? Good question.
Thank you, Dave. The next question is for Tara. In order to prepare an organization for incident response, what roles do exercises, tabletops, and other pre-incident activities play in cyber mitigation and response?
Okay, let's start with ensuring that we do a preparedness overview, just to ensure that the audience is aware of what preparedness consists of. So preparedness would begin with an organization's disruption management plan, and this may consist of incident management policies, service or business continuity plans, and disaster recovery strategies. A prepared organization would have documented assets that support the critical infrastructure, along with things such as data flow charts to help the organization and any individuals involved understand how the data is shared across the enterprise. Each one of these strategies should establish categories in order to classify an incident according to the severity of the impact to the organization. Each approach of the disruption management plan should identify individual risks and tasks that align roles and responsibilities of each specific employee, followed up with a second line of defense through a backup person. Each line of defense should recognize the appropriate entities inside the organization as well as outside of the organization that needs to be contact concerning what element that is being addressed within the incident. Conducting pre-incident exercises allows an organization to test their plans and the overall organization's knowledge and ability to respond accordingly. Developing a threshold in order to declare an organizational incident kind of sets the environment for the plan to be initiated. And changing up these scenarios offers participants the opportunity to test the flexibility of their response element in order to challenge the adaptability of that specific procedure. So exercises can start with a walkthrough involving the entire organization, to partial plans, to a full-fledged tabletop exercise. And DHS offers various resources to assist organizations with capturing assets that make up the current cybersecurity baseline and developing strategies to respond to and activities to test their response plan or any element that's within their disruption management plan. I can go into a little bit more in depth into some of these resources if you know the audience would like. So some of these resources include operational reviews, control assessments, vulnerability scans, third-party vendor relationship management, risk and vulnerability assessment, phishing campaigns, and as I said, we can also develop full tabletop exercise that meets the specific needs of the organization.
Thank you so much, Tara. The next question is for Marty. Should I or my company or agency invest in cybersecurity insurance, and what are the benefits of that?
Well, Rita, that's a really good question. I think we talk about that a lot, unfortunately too much in some cases on Capitol Hill, and even with some of the members have had a chance to talk to them. The thing I would look at for insurance is we don't know what we don't know. And when you look at cybersecurity insurance, it's sort of like an evolving industry at this point. There's a lot of facets of, look at it this way. When you're looking at insurance, you're trying to hedge your bets against what may happen. You hope you never have to deal with that. But as cybersecurity is continuing to evolve and unfortunately more nefarious characters are getting better and better at what they do, insurance coverage is a good way to plan ahead. Again, the fact that it's an evolving industry allows it to sort of adapt to your company's needs. Now, big to or large to mid-sized companies not going to have the same needs as a small business. There's certainly some more redundancy built into what the large companies can do. There's more for them to fall back on if something goes kaput. However, with a small business, if something shuts down for 5-10 minutes and it's 1 or 2 employees that are involved, that's a real big problem. So when you're looking at your insurance, you want to look at, one, the needs of your company. What type of safeguards are going to best help you in what you do? Are you a middleman type operation where you're not necessarily the end or the beginning of the supply chain? You may need to look at what type of insurance you need to get. You need to hedge more on the fact that, or we need to cover ourselves more for liability if something goes wrong in the equipment we're providing versus setting up the initial system. So I would strongly look towards any company, putting forth the effort to do their due diligence and look at different policies in their states, because what works in Michigan doesn't work in Nevada, may not work in Hawaii. They're all going to be a little bit different. So looking at what's going on, New York was sort of cutting edge a couple of years ago in what they did with cyber insurance for companies. A lot of that was sort of driven by what many of the attorneys, a lot of the law firms got going and said, hey, look, this is what we need to look at because there's so much out there as far as information that can be taken or lost and used for such, again, nefarious purposes that we need to figure out how can we best protect our clients. So the big sort of blanket answer is absolutely yes. But again, you really need to do your homework on what policy works best for you and your industry. Again, healthcare is going to be different than another industry. But I can't see, at this point, advising against it. I think anybody should look at it and, again, tailor for your needs. And, again, the bottom line with any sort of insurance is just sort of a blanket statement, but it's sort of protecting yourself against what may happen versus what will happen. So it's definitely, I think, worthwhile to invest in that.
Thank you, Marty. And Tedrick, you also wanted to add to that answer?
Yeah, insurance is part of an overall risk management strategy, and we work with clients in assessing it. The underwriting in the insurance industry with respect to cyber insurance, it's a fast-growing area, but the underwriting is still a bit uncertain. So what you pay may vary from state to state, from carrier to carrier, from broker to broker, and you have to look really carefully at what the language is for purposes of coverage. I'll give you one example. Recently, one of the largest law firms in the world had a breach that was caused by what was suspected to be a state-sponsored attack. Another nation had allegedly been involved. And so they submitted their claim for, I think it was about $12 million, we aren't quite sure, for the cost of remediation. And the carrier said, no, because this may have involved a state actor, we're going to call it an act of terrorism or an act of war, and it's therefore excluded. So you need to think about the types of risks you are likely to face, and cities are susceptible to DDoS from the attacks upon systems from things like that. So there's a lot that goes into it, and you want to really think carefully about your broker and the language and the policies.
Thank you, Tedrick. And actually, the next question is for you. What new laws are affecting cybersecurity obligations in public works?
So if we start with the world in general, you all have probably heard of the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation that's been passed by the EU that went into effect in May of 2018, and it really focused on privacy in personal data and personal information as a fundamental right. And if you look at what California's new law that's coming into place, the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, on January 1st, 2020, it also imposes a lot of obligations on the operators of websites to allow individuals to correct, delete, erase their data if they want, and also have a right to claim damages. Now, for nonprofits, and I also believe for municipal entities, there's not going to be the same level of risk, but that does tend to set the standard for the governmental units and governmental industry, governmental entities that are out there. So if you're looking at what is the future with respect to these laws, each state will impose its own requirements, but you're going to face more and more what's going on in the private sector and the risks associated with that. So we also may see some laws come about as we see more and more of these attacks on cities and on other public works administrations, but as of yet, I haven't seen anything specific to that area.
Thank you, Tedrick. Next question, I think Dave wanted to answer. What are my chances of getting my data back if I pay a ransomware?
That's a really good question. The short answer is it's not good at all. What the data shows is that those that react to an incident, one in four will get their data back. And then of those, half are going to get hit again. When you pay that ransom, as far as they're concerned, you're a customer. So half of those get hit again, and there's no guarantee you're getting that data back. Only 1 in 4 get their data back. So if you're reacting to this, chances are you're not getting your data back. You got to get ahead of it. So good question.
Thank you, Dave. Next question was for Tara. Can you explain the importance of having a designated person or team that concentrates on security elements such as identification, classification, containment, and recovery in order to support the overall organizational cybersecurity health? That's a long question, but
and that's okay. This is a question we actually get asked of organizations quite often, and this is an element that we usually try and spend a great deal of time on because it's probably one of the areas that is underestimated, if I may. But having a designated person or team ensures that there's an established central location for information gathering, delivering, and reporting of information during times of stress. When an organization is experiencing an event or incident, it is not the adequate time to develop this strategy. This is something that should be implemented and applied across the organization prior to experiencing an event or incident. But with an informed team monitoring vulnerable elements within a network or an environment, the capacity to recognize discrepancies in its early stages produces early detection, which allows for prompt identification, classification, containment in order to recover with minimal loss. With proper communication channels established prior to an incident, the organization will have the ability to respond in a more timely manner to all who have a need to know, being informed as the activities are unfolding. This team should also be responsible for processing or ensuring consistent guidelines and controls are being abided by across the enterprise. They are responsible for the comprehensive guidance regarding a specific system, plan, program, mission, or objective of the organization. They should also be responsible for producing and reporting all of the valuable information to outside entities in order to get the response resources in a timely manner that's needed based off of the incident and the impact of the incident to the organization. So developing or having a central person or a centralized team in order to keep a watch, if I may, on all of these different elements is essential to how the response and the recovery is going to unfold.
thank you so much, Tara. The next question is for Marty. How often should my agency provide refresher courses or training opportunities on cybersecurity?
Oh, another good question. And I'm going to go back to what Tara just mentioned a little ago. I know it's hard for each organization to sort of designate a point person, but if you have someone that serves in that capacity that works closely with the CIO, I promised myself I wouldn't go crazy on acronyms and insider jargon, so I apologize. If you have someone that can work closely with the CIO or CFO or head security point person in the agency, that's a great idea to sort of monitor what sort of training is available. So sort of be the insider that keeps tabs on that sort of thing. You know, for those members that run their SCADA systems, you know, responsible for large systems, that's something where information is coming out almost on a continual flow. You can find something going on, a training course, and informational items that are out there all the time. And I would sort of advise you to look at your industry again, going back to that and saying, what are my needs? How much is the industry changing? But definitely quarterly. I think every 3 months, if you can offer some sort of refresher to your employees or make that information available, you know, between DHS and, you know, DOE has a cyber wing that deals a lot with the grid. You know, any of these types of programs are out there and generally at minimal to no cost. Look at making sure your organization is in tune with that. It's one of those where you hear too much information is really not an option. You need to sort of almost go information overload to find out what's going on there. For every white hat or sort of good character, there's a black hat out there trying to find a way to bring your system down, unfortunately. And sometimes not even a 1-to-1 ratio. So looking at how can you stay 1 or 2 or 3 steps ahead is something you have to stay continually on top of. And sometimes this takes a back seat in some organizations, but I think we see a lot in the news where we see somebody's system getting hacked in a healthcare system, and unfortunately data is out there all the time when it gets poached. And you know, looking at the fact that it's not going to stop. For every time there's a safeguard or firewall, somebody's going to look to crash that. So you need to make sure that you do the best job you can. Unfortunately, you know, a majority of the fault or the breakdown is at the personal individual level. On the plus side, that same holds true. So how much training is available, you should really look at that. And again, some fields may not have that type of training readily available, but sort of proactive. You know, you can proactively look out there and say, what's available for me? Talk to those in your similar professions or even outside professions. Say, look, you know, I'm a little worried. We've been really branching out to the use of drones. And in this case, you know, we've had our neighboring community have their drone system hacked. It's shut down. You know, I won't pick on poor cities that have had their cities shut down, but a certain segment of your public works operation or your cyber operation could be held hostage just because you simply are not up to speed with making sure your patchwork is taking place. That again, your safeguards and firewalls are not up to speed. So looking quarterly, I think anything past that, you're really sort of playing with fire and leaving yourself open to any sort of intrusion.
Thank you, Marty. And just a reminder to our participants today to send your questions through the chat pod, and we will get those answered as quickly as possible by our panelists. The next question, I believe Dave is going to answer. What should I consider to create a good password?
Okay, this one's critical. And the reason why I want to stress it is remember, one of your 3 greatest risks, the 3 Ps, one of your 3 greatest risks, your biggest, is a poor password. And here's why I want to stress this. What you've got to realize is that in your city or within your organization, half of your staff have a password that's easily compromisable. Think about that risk. If it's your finance director, if it's a mayor, this is big. So what I want to start with is number one, every device has a password. That includes these guys. Every device has a password. And with these guys, a 4-digit passcode is not good enough. A 4-digit passcode and a little bit of social engineering, that phone's compromised. So number one, every device has a password. Number 2, I would recommend passphrases over complex passwords. Most people can't memorize a complex password, especially when you think about many different passwords. An 8-digit character with uppercase, lowercase, special characters, it's difficult to remember. But when you move to a passphrase, it's many more characters. It could be 12 or more characters, but it's long enough to be a phrase. And I'll give you an example. A passcode, which most people hate, could be something as simple as 8, capital D, lowercase j, at, exclamation, 123. You can't remember that. But if you think about a passphrase, for example, I like 2 cheeseburgers, exclamation. It's easy. I mean, that's almost 20 characters, and it's much easier for us to memorize. So number one, every device has a password. And if that device could be encrypted, I know it's not password related, but every device that you've got needs encryption. But number one, every device has a password. Number two, leverage passphrases, because every character you add makes it more secure, but also for us, it's easy to remember. Number two, every system that provides what's called two-factor authentication, enable it. If you have technology in your environment that doesn't provide two-factor authentication, I would be driving the vendor to add that, or I would be looking for another vendor. That's simple. So number one, every device has a password. Number two, leverage passphrases. Number three, leverage two-factor authentication, enable it. Number four, never write your password down. What you need to know is in your organization, one in three have their password written down somewhere within arm's reach at their workspace. 1 in 3. Too many compromises come from internal with disgruntled employees, and they have easy access because people are writing their passwords down. So do not write your passwords down. Number four, don't use obvious passwords. There's an organization called Splash Data that every year they come out with the top worst passwords list. The number one worst password for years has been 12345 Number two is password. Do not take what you create for your password lightly. And the fact of the matter is half of the people in every organization are. So don't use obvious passwords. Also, change your passwords regularly. One of the recommendations that came out not too long ago when passphrases became a recommendation was that because of the length of the passwords, you wouldn't have to change passwords periodically. I have never liked that. And then when you see recent breaches to where large organizations are storing passwords in clear text, it shows you've got to change these passwords still periodically. And then lastly, when you think about passwords, passphrases, complex passwords, all of us have between personal and business probably 20 or more different systems to think about managing passwords. One of the things I do recommend is look to leverage a reputable password vault to help you manage, create these passwords. And then lastly, do not use the same password across multiple systems. Too many times I find people that I kind of think of the Lord of the Rings, right? One ring to rule them all, but they will use one password to access every system. I've just got to compromise one thing to be in it. So there's about, all of these things will make up a good password policy or the start of a password policy. But I do want to recommend there's a handful of better things that need to be considered with passwords. Start with a policy and then implement it through technology. But do not take passwords lightly because it's one of the 3 greatest risks that you've got.
Thank you so much, Dave. I appreciated that answer, and I learned a lot, actually. The next question is ransomware a particular concern? I believe Tedrick was going to start with that answer.
Well, I think if you look at the sort of most publicized attacks that have occurred with respect to cities, it's usually ransomware. And for those of you, we've mentioned the word before, but ransomware creates a particular seizing in the chest and nervousness, because whether you're a city or, say, a small veterinary clinic, if you have ransomware, you'll get a page that pops up that says, we've encrypted all your data. We've locked it into a safe and we've encrypted it. We're bad guys. And if you want access to it again, you have to pay us a certain amount, usually of Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency. And if you followed in the news, this is what's happened to Baltimore and Atlanta and a number of other cities in the past, and not to pick on them because it really could happen to anybody. And I think for each of those cities, the costs are expected to be in the $17 million range. And if you look at the amount of Bitcoin that was required or requested in each of them, it was between $50,000 and $75,000 worth of Bitcoin. But I think, as Dave said earlier, there's a small chance that if you pay, you're going to be able to succeed in getting that encryption key sent to you. And just to, if you look at the New York Times today, I think there's an article from 2 days ago, just as an example of what a problem this is. A city in Florida, Riviera Beach, Florida, about 35,000 people, so not particularly large, was hit when a police department employee clicked on a phishing email. And then ransomware was, a ransomware page popped up, and the request was for $592,000 in ransomware. And the city yesterday got together with their insurer and decided to pay it because all of their systems were down. They were unable to collect revenue from water bills and tickets. And so it's yet to be seen whether that'll work or not. But that kind of discussion and all the things that Tara was talking about, that if you've thought about it in advance and you have someone who's communicating with the public and you have alternative systems to make all this work, I think it's probably the biggest issue that cities currently face. And I'm sure all the other panelists have had experiences or at least thought hard about this issue.
Thank you, Tedrick. And one of the things you mentioned was phishing emails, and that is our next question that Dave's going to start answering. What can I do to better protect against phishing emails?
So with every email you get, there's 5 things, at least these 5 things that need to be done, and it's quick. But the reason why I want to stress these 5 things is because our second greatest risk out of the 3 Ps when we look at them is people. And with every city I know, the staff, as an American society, I think 2 things. We're too trusting, and especially our cities, we're just too busy, which makes us real low-hanging fruit for the bad guys. When you look at every email that comes in, taking a few seconds to do these 5 things is going to help. And number one is you've got to look at every letter and the email address of the person that emailed you. And I really want to stress this because what the bad guys will do is they'll change one letter. They'll change an I to an L. Or they may add one letter. Or they may make the email domain look similar. And if we're just glancing at it, if we're just looking at the name, we're deceived. I've seen too many times where they'll change, like, for example, a mayor's email address by one letter. And they're deceived. So number one, look at every letter in the email address. You need to know that you know that is the person's email address. Sanity check it against your contact list. Number 2, never click any link. Instead, you want to, if it's on your PC, you'll hover the link with your mouse and it'll pop up in the bottom right what that link's address is. Or if it's your mobile device or tablet, if you press and hold, it'll pop up. Don't let go, but press and hold, it'll pop up what that link is. And here's what most people don't understand, that when you look at a link, it's the opposite of how in English we read. We read left to right. Well, these links actually are from right to left, more like Hebrew and Greek. But we're not going to dive into a technical part. Instead, what I want to give you is a rule of thumb. If you get a link that's long and ugly, have a red flag. Most links should be short, tight. The reputable businesses will keep them short and tight so it looks plausible. I'm not saying it's not legit, but any long, ugly link, have a red flag before you click it, because many times they'll prefix it to the left with something that sounds reasonable, but then as you further go to the right, you determine it's not the right address. So number one, look at every letter in the email address. Number 2, hover the links and be certain that the link is valid before you click it. Number 3, never download or click a link unless you're 100% sure. 99.9% is not good enough. You got to be 100% sure that you know that document's legit or the link is legit. That's number 3. Number 4, and this is an easy one. Should you be getting this email address? Should you be getting this email? Is it reasonable that that person would have sent this email to you? Is it reasonable that that organization would have sent this email to you? If it's not reasonable, it's not legit. And the last thing, and I really want to stress this one, if you're not 100% sure, take a second set of eyes. Forward the email into your IT staff, have them review it. If you don't trust your IT staff, ask your neighbor, someone that you trust, just to second guess the email. And the reason why I stress this, taking 30 seconds to have somebody second guess you is much better than 3 hours, 3 days, 3 weeks, or 3 months rebuilding your network, or maybe never getting your data back. So those 5 things are literally a few seconds that you should be looking at with every email that you get. And don't think that it's going to be every email that you get, you're forwarding it into IT or you're having somebody look at it. It's really the exception or the, more than the norm at that point. But I'm just stressing, slow down, because like I said, everyone's too busy. And the second thing is stop trusting. These bad guys are taking advantage of those 2 traits that we have. So that's it.
Thank you, Dave. Next question is about asset management. Briefly describe asset management and the benefits of implementing an asset management program in order to assist in the event of an incident. Tara, could you start with that answer, please?
Yeah, I definitely want to stress that when an organization is building their security within the organization up, or even beginning to build specific plans that revolve around their security needs within the organization, asset management should be considered the foundation of all security plans. Meaning that you have to understand what is owned by the organization, who is responsible for that particular asset. And within DHS, we refer to assets as your people, your information, which is your data, your technology, which is your physical devices, and then the facilities that encompass your people, your information, and your technology. So having an asset management plan is essential to being able to keep up with the changes in the organizational security needs. So looking at what an asset management plan should consist of, asset management should consist of the identification, the documentation, and the continuous monitoring during the life cycle of the people that support the organization, the information or data that is produced within the organization, the technology or physical devices that generate the data and are utilized by the people within the organization, and the facilities that encompass the people, the information, and the technology. Those are your key elements when you're talking about asset management, and understanding where each of these elements reside, who is the owner, who is the operator, whether it be a device, a piece of data, whatever asset that you're dealing with at that moment is essential to understanding how to protect it and where vulnerabilities may lie. The documentation of each element should identify each asset and that support a critical service within the organization. And let me go a little bit in depth on what we define a critical service as. We're speaking to water sector specifically, so within each organization there is one service that is critical to the viability of that organization. Is it your SCADA system? Is it your pumps that are releasing the water? Is it the delivery of the water supply? Is it your billing system? What element or what critical service within your organization is considered most critical? So once you have these assets documented, they should be prioritized with authority and responsibility established for each identified asset. Understanding that the employee that is the owner or even the operator of that particular asset understands that they are identified as the owner or the operator and what their responsibilities to that asset consist of. Again, going back to what the previous question about having a designated person or team, having that designation to a specific asset consistently supplies the adequate management of that asset from inception to the grave with detailed change management. Assets are going to change throughout its life cycle within an organization. Are those changes specifically documented and adequately managed so that the enterprise are aware of any changes to that asset and how those changes have affected the overall operations within the organization. Access to each of these assets should be monitored and managed to ensure sustainability and protection is maintained in order to safeguard the critical service that asset is supporting. Adequate management offers effective resource allocation through organizational efficiency, assisting with optimizing operations, while producing risk management strategies connected with the owners and the operators by identifying risks associated with that asset early on in its life cycle. So asset management can be considered the core function of building a security management plan.
Thank you, Tara. Another question about passwords. How is it best to manage so many passwords for several personal accounts? Dave, do you have some input on that question?
Yep. Let me start with two places that are very common that I do not recommend where to manage those passwords. Number one, and this is too many times, in a notebook in your middle drawer at the top of your desk for you and all of your department heads. Bad, bad, bad. Number two, do not manage account information or passwords in your contacts. When you've been compromised by ransomware, where's one of the first places that virus is going to go? It's going to your contacts. They've got access to it because you have access and you just authorized it. So number one, don't write it down and put your account information or other account information in the top of your desk drawer. Number two, do not put it in your contact information in email. So what do I recommend for managing those passwords? Number one, I recommend leveraging a password vault. I would look toward a reputable one. The one that I personally use and the one that I frequently recommend is a password vault called LastPass, LastPass. You can use that for personal, you can use it for families, you can use it for businesses, but I would strongly recommend that password vault.
Thank you, Dave. The next question is about the cloud. We always hear about the cloud. Does putting your data in the cloud solve all of your cybersecurity problems? Do you want to tackle that one first, Dave?
Yes. It does not. That's the quick answer. When you think about moving servers into the cloud, instead of those servers being physically located at your city or at your organization, those servers are now moved into a data center and access provided there. Having them in a data center is going to secure them physically, but here's what you've got to know. if you are connected to the internet, if there's a network card in there and you're connected to the internet, you're at risk. There's no 100% guarantee. When you're connected, you're at risk. Having it in the data center physically protects that server, but because it has access and it's got internet access, it's still at risk. And moving it to the data center is a good first step, but you still have to have IT professionals managing, securing, patching, and keeping it secure ongoing. So moving it to the cloud is not the big red button that just magically makes it safe. You still have to secure and then keep it secure ongoing.
Thank you, Dave. Tara wanted to add to the answer on that one.
Yeah, I think a huge element to make sure that we push out to the public whenever they're considering migration to the cloud is the fact that no matter where the data resides, they are still responsible for that data. So if they're located in Texas and the data center is located in New York, they want to ensure that they know all laws in every jurisdiction where the data may cross over or even reside. Sometimes that is a huge misconception when it comes to cloud, that by sourcing it out to a third-party vendor, they're relinquishing responsibility, and that is probably the number one element that needs to be understood when migrating to the cloud or even utilizing a third-party vendor. The owner of the data always has liability and responsibility of that data.
Thank you, Tara. And Tedrick also wanted to add to that answer.
I just thought I'd point out after hearing Tara's comment that when you are negotiating with the cloud, you're not going to have much leverage with AWS or Azure or whomever you're dealing with. So it's another reason to really think carefully about your role and your dealing with the data and your liabilities associated with it, because those cloud providers are not going to bail you out.
Great, thank you, Tedrick. Next question is for Marty. If I don't patch or take any other safety measures, what's the worst that would happen?
Well, it's one of those. I'll start off with, I think, the first thing I said. What we don't know, we don't know. Between Tedrick, Dave, and Tara's comments, sort of they've laid the groundwork for what you need to do to protect yourself without going into the entire doom and gloom of what happens when you don't. But let's look at this. Time is a luxury that business owners and those that are applying the straight and narrow don't necessarily have, where hackers, be it back in my day when you were a teenager, you did prank calls and hung up on people. These folks now are much smarter than I was and can sit around and figure out ways to get in and around your firewalls and whatever and really shut your businesses down. That's at the most benign level. Then you get nation state actors that really want to just shut you down and cause you problems. Sort of stick with the SCADA example. If you, for whatever reason, are not patching or receiving regular updates or using regular updates, you may lose that whole system. If you're overseeing water for a large county and it's shut down, imagine telling your clients, your customers, your constituents that for the next hour you won't have water. Now multiply that because your system's down and it's being held for ransomware. You don't have that water for a week. That's, I think, pretty much as close to chaos as any of us could ever imagine. And that's just one example. So what you need to look at is any time you're receiving these updates, I go back to what Dave said, which is a really good example. First of all, you want to verify where the update is coming from. At any given time, Microsoft or Apple or whatever you're using may send updates. And reading right to left is probably one of the best examples I can use. Make sure that you're going and everything checks out. I don't know how many times you see somebody that says instead of seeing .com, they'll see .coom. Clicking that on is all the difference in the world between having a safe and secure system and having something open to rife to all sorts of problems, be it ransomware, spyware, direct denial of service, anything you can think of to crash your system is out there. So making sure your link is safe to get that update is probably first and foremost. Secondly, I think you need to find that fine line. You really don't want to go running to mom and dad, so to speak, to the company's IT department every time you see something suspicious. However, I would err on that side as opposed to just saying, well, I think it's just an isolated incident. It may just be me. Going back to, what all of my other fellow panelists between Tedrick, Dave, and Tara have said, is that anything's interconnected. So you may have that problem, the person next to you may have that problem, and if you don't, if you're not sure, you might want to check that out. So you want to make sure that, one, that if this is a problem, it's an isolated incident, a quick fix, but you may not be qualified to make that assessment. So if you see something that's not smelling right, looking right, check with IT. So if you're not taking advantage of that, you really open yourself up to problems. Making sure that your patchwork information is continually being updated. And I would also be a little bit more proactive. If for whatever reason you've noticed in the past 7, 8 months that you're not receiving updates, nothing seems like it's checking out. You're running on the same system, but you're not seeing those patchworks because it's something that should occur on a regular basis. Now, that depends on certainly what kind of software and information you're using, but definitely a few months go by and you're not seeing updates. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world to check with your IT department. Say, hey, we're not seeing updates. They say, well, there's nothing to update. Great, you're safe and covered. But do not let that become a lapse where you're looking around and saying, yeah, I think everything's okay. Again, making sure it's a legitimate source first, but when you update it, I would strongly again suggest do not put that off. When your system gives you an opportunity, to update and reboot for half an hour, that half an hour is inconvenient. But down the road and in the long run, that's a big problem if you don't make that upgrade because you're really leaving yourself open to all sorts of problems.
Thank you, Marty. Dave also wanted to add to that answer.
What I wanted to stress and add to what Marty shared is don't take this lightly. When you look at your 3 greatest risks, the third one is patching. And the reason why I want to stress this is you've got to take out of your mind what's the typical persona of what most people think a hacker is. And what you've got to understand is a hacker can be a lady in a coffee shop. A hacker can be a nation state. What you need to know is it's not geeky kids with pimples. These are well-funded nation states, organizations. They're across every demographic. It is a lot of money they're making, and it's growing. And I want to stress the fact that when you look at this was an outbreak. It was 2 years ago. It was called the WannaCry virus. 150 countries. 150 countries. And then you think about everyone within those countries. And what the patch that would protect against this outbreak was released 3 months earlier. 3 months earlier. Those that were patching were fine. But it was an outbreak that hit 150 countries, and it was a nation state that was doing this. So don't think that your city or your organization is protected in some way, that they're not targeting you. I'm telling you, they're targeting everybody. Anyone that has money and they can force them to part with it. But patching, and I want to stress this, is critical. People, passwords, and patching, you've got to focus on those. Otherwise, you are low-hanging fruit for the bad guys.
Thank you, Dave. And Tedrick also wanted to include something on this question.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I'm in a way piling on, but if you look at patching and the Equifax breach that occurred that involved 146 million Americans, and you heard the CEO speak before Congress, he said, well, we just missed the patch. It was an Adobe vulnerability that could have been patched, and he basically tried to sort of point out Max or somebody in their department who missed it on a patch Tuesday, which a lot of organizations do. So it's really important. And with respect to the WannaCry reference, right now there is a new vulnerability recently released called Bluekeep that's in the news. And I think DHS and the NSA have all released statements about it needing to be patched. There is a patch from Microsoft available for this. But just to tell you the severity of it, Microsoft is issuing a patch for Windows XP, which it doesn't even support anymore. So this is the same equivalent of WannaCry, and we'll see with Bluekeep if we can do a better job of preventing against it. So it's something to ask your IT team about.
All right. Thank you so much, Tedrick. Now we're going to go through our wrap-up portion of the program and just give each panelist a couple minutes to tell us one thing that maybe they didn't get asked on the program that they think is important. And we will start with Marty first on this. If you want to give us kind of your parting thoughts on
well, I guess first of all, just it was a pleasure to hear from Dave and Tedrick and Tara. Sort of reiterates what I knew and makes me feel a little bit better, because a lot of it's just, I hate to say this because there's some level of, I think, I want to stress the last thing I said, and I got to put it this way. Don't be embarrassed to admit what you don't know as a public works professional or any professional about cybersecurity. It's an evolving field. I mean, it's really just growing. At any time you may see, including the Internet of Things, there may be over 1 trillion devices and next year is connected to each other. You just don't know what we don't know. And I think it's very important to, one, ask questions. You're not going to learn without asking questions to figure out, am I doing everything to make sure my business, my customers, my community is covered? And I would just leave with the fact of saying that do not take anything for granted. Do not make assumptions. Make sure that you're taking every step to safeguard your business and so on and so forth. Because again, we have all sorts of nefarious actors out there, from the lowest level, as I mentioned, the kid that used to just call and hang up on people, to the nation states that are really out there looking to actively bring down whole governments. I mean, it runs the whole gamut. So I would just say again, just be very wary of what's out there and take that extra few minutes to just take those steps and make sure that you've safeguarded yourself.
Thank you, Marty. Dave, would you like to go next?
Yeah, and just to come alongside and echo Marty on that, first of all, thank everyone for joining in the program today, but I do want to remind you, ask who is helping you with technology, what are we doing about passwords, patching, and people? And if you get a blank stare, you don't get the answers that you want, that should raise a red flag. Secondly, and it's one of the things that Tedrick had brought up about XP, that has long been sunsetted. If you've got Windows 7, which is very common, if you've got Windows 7 or Server 2008 in your environment, it's being sunsetted this coming January. So work with who's helping manage your IT to make certain that your software, your operating systems, your hardware is upgraded. Because if you get behind, you become great risk for cyber attack. But thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And Tedrick, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I know what we've done is basically scare the heck out of everybody with respect to some of the things we've talked about, but what I like to come back to is the idea that the reason we're so concerned with this is because of all of the great things that technology provides in public works and to cities. It really does enhance the quality of life. It provides data that you as professionals are able to utilize to make your cities better places to live. But you do have to carry with it the responsibilities and protections that exist here. So whether it's talking to someone in your department, exploring whether a NIST or SOC or ISO 27001, which may sound like gibberish, but if there's a protocol that works best for your organization to start looking at, to benchmark yourself with other communities, just thinking about it and participating in events like this, you'll be the better for it.
Thank you, Tedrick. And finally, Tara, your parting thoughts?
Yes. First of all, I want to thank APWA for the invitation to participate in today's webcast, so thanks so much. And I definitely want to close out with saying the DHS offers free resources to every element that's been described today. We're responsible for the protection and the sustainment of critical infrastructures across the United States, and that includes water, wastewater, so forth. So with that being said, if there was an element that was addressed today, whether it be capturing your assets or developing a disaster recovery business continuity plan, if you have an existing plan and want to conduct a tabletop to see how your current plan plays out against a specific scenario, there's not a resource that we do not provide totally free on a voluntary basis. And being that we're talking specifically to water sector, we also have control system type assessments that is like a validated architect design review, which we refer to as our VADR. We have downloadable resources such as our cybersecurity evaluation tool, which is known as our CSET, that can help your organization address any specific guidelines that it needs to adhere to. So if any organization is interested in further details on any of our resources, feel free to reach out to Ms. Rita. She can give you our contact information. Of course, I cannot close without telling about our 24/7 threat detection and incident response team. They can be reached at any hour of the day at NCIC, that's NCCIC customer service altogether at hq.dhs.gov, or feel free to give them a call at 1-888-282-0870. And thanks so much for the time today.
Thank you, Tara. And that is all the time we have for today. I want to thank our panelists, Tara, Tedrick, Dave, and Marty, for sharing their knowledge and experience with us. And this is Rita Cassida, and it's been a pleasure moderating this program for you. Please remember to register for the next program in this series titled Talking Top Tech, Asset Management Technologies Edition. It will be on Thursday, August 1st at 10 Central. And there will be an evaluation form sent out after this program. The link to the survey will be emailed. And due to the free format of this program, just a reminder, is not eligible for CEUs today. A recording of today's program will be in the APWA Members Library and on YouTube within 1 week. APWA members can log into the library to access past Click, Listen, and Learns and Talking Top Techs, and also conference content free of charge. If you're not an APWA member, just a reminder, you can take the Members Library for a test drive. Spend 2 weeks accessing all of the materials on the Members Library for free. Look for the link to the sign up in your email today after the program. Thank you so much.